Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history of the United States. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. The Caldwell Mansion stands as a grim sentinel on the outskirts of Ravenswood, Virginia, its weathered stone facade bearing silent witness to the passage of time. Built in 1872 by industrialist Percival Caldwell, the estate was once the crown jewel of Westmoreland County, a symbol of prosperity and ambition. Yet by the autumn of 1918, as the Spanish influenza ravaged the nation and the Great War drew to its bloody conclusion, the mansion had become something else entirely, a repository of secrets that should have remained hidden. According to county records, the Caldwell family fortune had dwindled considerably by 1918. The last occupants of the mansion were Matthias Caldwell, Percival's nephew, his wife, Adelaide, and several staff members whose names appear only fleetingly in employment ledgers. What transpired within those walls during that fateful October has been the subject of speculation, rumor, and hushed conversations for decades. The official account, as documented in the Ravenswood Herald dated November 3, 1918, describes the discovery as a regrettable incident resulting from the deteriorating mental state of the estate's caretaker. This sanitized version of events would have remained unchallenged were it not for a collection of personal journals, correspondence, and photographic plates discovered during the property's renovation in 1963. These documents, now preserved in the Westmoreland Historical Society archives, tell a far more disturbing story, one that begins with a seemingly innocent discovery in the mansion's sprawling attic and ends with the dissolution of the Caldwell presence in Ravenswood. On October 17, 1918, Adelaide Caldwell noted in her diary, "Matthias has been spending an unusual amount of time in the East Wing. He claims to be organizing family documents, though I cannot recall the last time he showed any interest in such matters. There is a stillness about the house that feels unnatural, as though the very walls are holding their breath." The east wing of the Caldwell Mansion housed a narrow staircase that led to what servants referred to as the forgotten attic, a space that had remained largely untouched since Percival Caldwell's death in 1897. According to household staff records, the area had been specifically sealed off at the patriarch's request, with explicit instructions that it should remain undisturbed. Ezra Hammond, the groundskeeper who had served the family for over 20 years, provided a written statement to local authorities following the incidents of late October. In it, he described how Matthias Caldwell had become increasingly withdrawn after discovering a hidden compartment behind a false wall in the attic. Mr. Caldwell emerged from the attic that evening looking like a man who had aged 10 years in a single afternoon, Hammond wrote. His complexion was ashen, his hands trembling so violently that he could hardly maintain his grip on the banister. When I inquired about his well-being, he simply stated that he had seen something that changed everything. He ordered the attic door locked and the key brought to his study immediately. What exactly Matthias Caldwell discovered remains a matter of conjecture, though several pieces of evidence suggest it was a collection of documents and artifacts that challenged his understanding of his own family's history. The inventory, taken after the events of October 28th, lists numerous journals bound in leather of uncertain origin, correspondence dating from 1875, 1893, and several specimen jars containing materials of an unidentified nature. Dr. Augustine Mercer, the family physician who attended to Adelaide Caldwell in the aftermath, noted in his medical records that she spoke repeatedly of the terrible truth hidden in plain sight and the burden of knowledge that no person should bear. These cryptic statements were initially attributed to the sedatives administered during her treatment, but later events would lend them a far more sinister significance. In the days following Matthias Caldwell's discovery, the household underwent a subtle but profound transformation. According to the kitchen staff's records, Matthias began taking all his meals alone in his study, while Adelaide's appetite diminished to the point that she subsisted primarily on tea and dry toast. The couple, once known for their animated evening discussions, now passed each other in hallways with barely a word exchanged. Most telling was Matthias's sudden directive that the servants should vacate the premises each day by sunset, returning only after sunrise the following morning. This unprecedented arrangement was explained away as a cost-saving measure, though financial records from the period indicate no particular economic hardship beyond the general post-war austerity affecting most of the region. On October 22nd, 5 days after his initial discovery, Matthias Caldwell sent a telegram to Dr. Thaddeus Whitlock, a former colleague from his days at Miskatonic University in Massachusetts. The message, preserved in Whitlock's personal papers, was uncharacteristically urgent. Have made discovery of grave importance. Stop. Requires your expertise. Stop. Come at once. Stop. Matter concerns ancestral research. Stop. Most disturbing implications. Stop. Whitlock's response, dated the following day, expressed his regret at being unable to travel due to his responsibilities at the university, but encouraged Caldwell to exercise the utmost caution when dealing with matters of historical significance, and to consider carefully whether some knowledge is better left undisturbed. This exchange suggests that whatever Matthias had discovered related to his family's history, a theory supported by subsequent events. The most detailed account of the mansion's atmosphere during this period comes from Lucinda Reynolds, Adelaide's personal maid. In a letter to her sister dated October 24th, Reynolds described how the mansion had become a place of shadows and whispers, where the master paces until dawn, muttering dates and names, while the mistress stares out her window as though expecting someone or something to emerge from the tree line. Reynolds's letter continues, "Yesterday, while delivering fresh linens to the upstairs corridor, I distinctly heard Mr. Caldwell conversing with someone in his study, though no visitors had been announced. When I inquired later if there had been a caller, Mrs. Caldwell gave me such a look, part fear, part warning, that I dared not mention it again. The staff speaks in hushed tones now of strange sounds emanating from the sealed attic, particularly in those hours just before dawn when the house should be at its quietest." The household staff began to notice other disturbances as well. The cook, Mrs. Wilhelmina Hargrove, reported that food left in the kitchen overnight would often be found partially consumed by morning, though no evidence of rodents or other pests could be found. The butler, Reginald Morriston, claimed to have heard footsteps traversing the upstairs hallway at odd hours, despite all occupants being accounted for in their respective rooms. Most unsettling were the reports from the gardener's assistant, young Percival Thornton, no relation to the mansion's builder, who insisted that he had observed someone watching him from the east wing attic window during his early morning duties. Someone who, when he looked more closely, appeared to match the description of Percival Caldwell himself, dead these 20 years. These accounts were initially dismissed as the product of overwrought imaginations, influenced by the general atmosphere of unease that had settled over the estate. Yet, as October progressed, the frequency and consistency of such reports increased, suggesting something beyond mere suggestion or coincidence. On October 25th, Matthias Caldwell made what would be his final journey into Ravenswood proper. Bank records show he withdrew a substantial sum from the family accounts, and several shopkeepers later recalled his disheveled appearance and distracted manner. At Morriston's Hardware, he purchased an unusual assortment of items: heavy-duty locks, several feet of chain, and a set of specialized tools typically used for metalwork. The proprietor, Silas Morriston, later testified that Caldwell had asked strange questions about the structural integrity of different metals and their resistance to environmental degradation. When Morriston inquired about the nature of the project, Caldwell reportedly stated that he was securing a family legacy and that some doors were never meant to be opened in the first place. From Morriston's hardware, Matthias proceeded to Blackwood's apothecary, where, according to the establishment's sales ledger, he purchased an array of uncommon substances: powdered silver nitrate, crystallized salt harvested from the Dead Sea, and several herbs known for their purported protective properties in various folk traditions. The apothecary, Jonah Blackwood, recalled that Matthias specified the items must be of the highest purity and untouched by modern processing methods. His final stop was at Ravenwood's modest public library, where he requested access to several obscure volumes on ancient burial practices and preservation techniques. The librarian, Miss Prudence Whitaker, noted in her daily log that Matthias spent several hours copying specific passages from these texts, his hand moving with feverish urgency. When she approached to inform him of the library's imminent closing, she observed that the pages before him contained detailed illustrations of various warding symbols from multiple cultural traditions. That evening, Adelaide Caldwell wrote what would be the final entry in her diary. "The sounds from above have grown more persistent. Matthias insists they are merely the settling of an old house, but I know better. Whatever he found in that attic has followed him down, followed us all. He works through the night, now, reinforcing the door, adding lock upon lock, but locks keep things out. What if what we fear is already inside? I have written to my sister in Richmond. If these words are found after I am gone, know that I suspected the truth long before Matthias discovered it in those yellowed pages. The Caldwell name has always carried a shadow." The events of October 26th through 28th must be pieced together from fragmentary evidence, as no complete eyewitness account exists. What is known with certainty is that on the morning of the 29th, Ezra Hammond arrived to find the mansion unnaturally silent. Upon entering through the kitchen door, he discovered evidence of a disturbance: furniture overturned, a trail of dark stains leading from the main staircase to the east wing, and, most alarmingly, the reinforced attic door standing ajar. Hammond's statement to local authorities describes what he found in Matthias Caldwell's study: walls covered with genealogical charts, historical documents, and newspaper clippings dating back to the 1850s. At the center of this maelstrom of information was a leather-bound journal, open to a page containing a detailed account of experiments conducted by Percival Caldwell in the years before his death, experiments involving what the journal referred to as the boundaries of mortality. The study itself had been transformed from its former state of dignified organization to something approaching a fortress. The windows had been covered with heavy drapes, their edges sealed with what appeared to be a mixture of wax and other substances. The doorframe bore freshly carved symbols matching those Matthias had been observed copying at the library. Most striking was the arrangement of furniture, all moved to the center of the room, creating a clear path around the perimeter, as though to allow for a continuous movement without obstruction. On the desk, beside the open journal, lay a half-consumed meal, the food still fresh enough to suggest it had been abandoned only hours before Hammond's arrival. Next to the plate was a small silver box containing what the groundskeeper described as a fine gray powder and a handwritten note, reading simply, "The final ingredient is oneself." Hammond wisely, perhaps, did not venture into the attic alone, but instead summoned the local sheriff, Bartholomew Hargrove. Hargrove's official report, filed later that day, is clinical in its language, but nonetheless conveys a sense of profound disturbance. Upon entering the attic space, this officer observed significant evidence of a struggle. Mr. Matthias Caldwell was located near the eastern window, in a condition suggesting extreme distress inconsistent with self-harm or accident. Mrs. Adelaide Caldwell was not present on the premises, nor has she been located at the time of this report. What the sheriff's report omits, but which emerges in his private correspondence with state authorities, is the unusual nature of the scene, which exhibited signs far beyond what could be explained by conventional understanding. Even more disturbing was the discovery of a hidden chamber within the attic, accessible only through the false wall that Matthias had initially discovered. This chamber, according to measurements taken during the subsequent investigation, was approximately 12 feet square and contained evidence of long-term use. A narrow cot, basic facilities, and shelving holding what appeared to be supplies dating back several decades. Most significantly, the chamber walls were lined with diagrams and mathematical calculations relating to what one document labeled the preservation process. The chamber's most unsettling feature, however, was its floor, not made of wood or stone as might be expected, but of a substance that, according to Hargrove's private notes, appeared organic in nature, yielding slightly to pressure like flesh, yet dry and preserved like ancient leather. Subsequent analysis by state authorities identified this material as human skin, treated through a process unknown to modern medicine, its origin impossible to determine due to the extensive modifications it had undergone. In the center of this grotesque floor stood what Hargrove described as an apparatus of indeterminate function, consisting of a metal frame supporting various glass containers connected by copper tubing. The containers held liquids of different colors and consistencies, some clear as water, others thick and opaque. The entire structure pulsed with a subtle rhythm, despite having no apparent power source or mechanical components. Among the papers recovered from this hidden room was a letter dated 1893 from Percival Caldwell to his associate, which referenced the necessity of maintaining our work through unconventional means and alluded to sacrifices that must be made to ensure the perpetuation of our research. The letter concluded with a warning that the price of extended research is paid not by the seeker, but by those who support the process. Additional documents detailed Percival's growing obsession with what he termed the continuity problem, his recognition that his lifespan would be insufficient to complete his research, and his determination to find a solution. Initial explorations focused on conventional preservation techniques, evolving gradually toward more esoteric approaches drawn from various mystical traditions and obscure medical practices. A breakthrough appeared to come in 1889 when Percival documented his discovery of a method for extracting the essential qualities of vitality from organic matter and transferring them to a new vessel. Early experiments involved small animals, with Percival noting varying degrees of success in prolonging their lives beyond natural spans. By 1892, however, his journals indicate a shift to human subjects, initially using biological materials obtained through unnamed sources, but eventually progressing to living individuals. The investigation into the events at Caldwell Mansion lasted several months, but yielded few definitive conclusions. Adelaide Caldwell was never found, though reported sightings of a woman matching her description emerged periodically in towns throughout Virginia and the Carolinas for years afterward. These accounts often described the woman as appearing unnaturally aged or infirm, moving with difficulty and avoiding direct contact with others. Matthias Caldwell, found alive but in a state of extreme psychological distress, was committed to the Blackwood Sanitarium in Richmond, where he remained until his death in 1924. His medical records describe a condition of persistent dissociative fugue, characterized by periods of lucidity interspersed with episodes during which he appeared to adopt entirely different personalities, some contemporary, others seemingly from earlier historical periods. During these episodes, he would speak in voices and dialects not his own, displaying knowledge of subjects and events to which he should have had no access. Most disturbing were the occasions when he would claim to be Percival Caldwell himself, recounting intimate details of the elder Caldwell's life and work that had never been publicly documented. During these periods, even his handwriting would change to match samples of Percival's preserved in family records. The attending physicians attributed these phenomena to an extreme form of hysterical identification exacerbated by the trauma of whatever he had witnessed in the attic. The case might have faded into obscurity were it not for the events of 1963, when the mansion, which had remained unoccupied since 1918, was purchased by the Westmoreland Historical Society with the intention of restoration. During the initial assessment of the property, workers discovered a sealed wall cavity in the master bedroom containing Adelaide Caldwell's complete journals, along with correspondence between Percival Caldwell and several European physicians whose names appear in connection with controversial theories of life extension. These documents revealed that Percival Caldwell had become obsessed with the concept of extending human life after the death of his wife in 1873. His research had led him to ancient texts and esoteric medical practices, culminating in a theory that life could be extended through specific procedures involving certain rare substances. More disturbing still was the revelation that Percival had apparently succeeded in extending his own life far beyond natural limits, though at a terrible cost. His journals describe a process requiring rare materials and specific environmental conditions found predominantly within his own family's estate. The renovation work proceeded cautiously, with special attention paid to the East Wing attic. When workers finally gained access to this space in April 1963, they discovered that the hidden chamber had been sealed with a mixture of concrete and other unidentifiable substances. Breaking through this barrier proved unexpectedly difficult, requiring specialized equipment and considerably more time than anticipated. What they found beyond this barrier differed significantly from what had been documented in the 1918 investigation. The organic flooring had been removed, as had the mysterious apparatus. In their place was a single wooden chair facing a small table on which rested a leather-bound book and a silver pocket watch. The book, when opened, contained only a single line of text, repeated on every page. "I remain, though forms may change." The pocket watch, though appearing to be of late 19th century manufacture, was still functioning perfectly despite not having been wound in decades. More curious still, it displayed not only the hour and minute, but also the date, which, when discovered, showed October 29, 1918, the exact date the attic had been sealed following the incident with Matthias and Adelaide. The final piece of this macabre puzzle came in the form of a medical examiner's report from 1897, the year of Percival Caldwell's supposed death. The document, discovered in county archives during research for the mansion's historical designation, notes several anomalies in the deceased's physical condition, including tissue that appeared remarkably vital for a man of advanced years, and unusual markings consistent with procedures of unknown purpose. This report, combined with the materials discovered in the mansion, suggests a horrifying possibility that the body interred in Percival Caldwell's grave may not have been Percival at all, but rather someone else entirely. Furthermore, entries in Adelaide's journal hint at her growing suspicion that someone within the household was not who they claimed to be, but had instead continued their existence through some unnatural means, possibly by assuming a new identity. Particularly telling is an entry from August 1918, in which Adelaide describes a peculiar incident. "Last night I awoke to find Matthias standing before the mirror in our bedroom, examining his reflection with an expression I have never before seen on his face. Not confusion or admiration, but something closer to clinical assessment, as though evaluating the condition of a garment he had donned. When he noticed my wakefulness, he smiled in a manner that sent a chill through me. For a moment, just a moment, he did not look like Matthias at all, but like someone much older, someone I had seen only in the portraits hanging in the main hall. If these speculations have merit, then what Matthias Caldwell discovered in the attic of his ancestral home was evidence that someone he had known was in fact Percival Caldwell himself, perpetuating his existence through unknown means. The hidden chamber, with its equipment and supplies, would have been where Percival conducted the preservation procedures described in his journals. This theory is supported by an entry in Adelaide's diary from September 1918, just weeks before the attic discovery. There is something about certain mannerisms I observe in this house, specific gestures and phrases, that I've only ever seen in the daguerreotypes and read in the letters of the family patriarch. Sometimes, when I hear voices in the house, I perceive tones entirely different, older, colder, from a different time. The implications of this discovery would have been devastating for Matthias, to learn not only that his ancestor had committed unspeakable acts in pursuit of extended life, but that his own household might be compromised by that very presence. The transformation would explain many of the peculiarities observed by the household staff in the days following Matthias's initial discovery in the attic. The withdrawal from social interaction, the changed habits, the insistence on solitude during nighttime hours when, according to Percival's journals, the preservation process was most active. During the 1963 renovation, workers reported numerous unexplained phenomena throughout the mansion. Tools would disappear only to be found in different locations, often arranged in patterns, reminiscent of the diagrams discovered in Percival's journals. Electronic equipment failed with unusual frequency, particularly in the vicinity of the East Wing. Several workers developed mysterious ailments, persistent headaches, unexplained fatigue, and in 2 cases, temporary but complete loss of voice. Most disturbing were the reports from the night watchman Vincent Hargrove, grandson of Sheriff Bartholomew Hargrove, who claimed to have observed lights moving behind the attic windows when the building was empty, and to have heard what he described as a conversation between multiple individuals, one speaking with authority, the others responding with deference, emanating from the sealed chamber before it was opened. These phenomena escalated dramatically following the breaching of the hidden chamber, culminating in an incident on April 29, 1963, exactly 45 years after the original events of 1918. According to statements from multiple witnesses, the entire mansion was filled with a sound like distant machinery, rhythmic and persistent, while the temperature in the East Wing dropped to near freezing despite the mild spring weather outside. The project's lead architect, Donovan Whitlock, a distant relation of Dr. Thaddeus Whitlock, Matthias's correspondent, reported that upon entering the attic that morning, he discovered the chair in the hidden chamber had been moved to face the door, and the previously empty journal now contained a single additional line. "The vessel weakens, but I endure." Following this incident, the renovation was temporarily suspended pending a more thorough investigation of the property's structural integrity, an explanation that satisfied public inquiry but masked the true reason for the delay. A series of consultations with experts in various fields, from structural engineering to parapsychology, all attempting to determine the nature of what had been unleashed within the mansion. Further support for the theory of Percival's unnatural continuation comes from Dr. Mercer's medical notes, which document a gradual change in the household atmosphere during those final days of October 1918. The physician noted an unusual tension between residents, with some household members appearing to strengthen while others seemed to deteriorate. Most tellingly, Mercer recorded changes in certain patterns around the mansion, which increasingly resembled samples of Percival Caldwell's documented habits preserved in family archives. The exact nature of the struggle that took place in the attic on the night of October 28th remains unknown, but physical evidence suggests a violent confrontation between Matthias and another individual, possibly Adelaide, who may have attempted to intervene in whatever process was underway, or perhaps even a manifestation of Percival himself. Sheriff Hargrove's suppressed report describes finding evidence of multiple individuals at the scene, along with signs that a second individual departed the premises under their own power. This would align with reported sightings of Adelaide in the months following the incident. All was described as changed or physically diminished. One such sighting, documented in the personal correspondence of Dr. Augustine Mercer, describes an encounter in a small town near the North Carolina border in December 1918. I am certain it was Mrs. Caldwell, though she appeared to have aged decades in the span of 2 months. Her hair, once a rich auburn, had turned completely white, and her previously smooth skin was deeply lined. Most striking was her gait. She moved with the stiffness of advanced age, yet with a curious deliberation, as though each step required conscious thought. When I called out to her, she turned toward me with an expression of such profound terror that I found myself unable to approach further. Before I could recover my composure, she had disappeared into the crowd at the train station. Similar accounts emerged periodically over the subsequent decades, always describing a woman of Adelaide's general appearance, but in a state of physical deterioration, inconsistent with normal aging. The geographical distribution of these sightings formed a discernible pattern, beginning in Virginia and the Carolinas, but gradually expanding outward, reaching as far as New Orleans by the mid-1930s and San Francisco by the 1950s. In each location where Adelaide was reportedly observed, local newspapers documented unusual occurrences in the following weeks. Unexplained disappearances, particularly of individuals living alone, reports of strange lights and sounds in abandoned buildings, and in several cases the establishment of small exclusive medical practices that operated briefly before closing without explanation, their proprietors vanishing as mysteriously as they had appeared. The final chapter of this disturbing narrative came in 1968, when an elderly patient was admitted to a sanatorium in the Blue Ridge Mountains, approximately 100 miles from Ravenswood. The individual, who provided no name, suffered from advanced physical deterioration, but exhibited periods of lucidity during which they spoke at length about a process of preservation that had finally failed after nearly a century. Medical records indicate that the patient's physical condition defied conventional understanding, showing signs of multiple treatments and unusual cellular structures that the attending physicians could not explain. Most striking was the patient's insistence that they had been born before the war between the states, and that they had existed far beyond a natural lifespan. Dr. Darr, Eleanor Whitlock, the attending physician and great-granddaughter of Dr. Thaddeus Whitlock, documented the patient's claims in extensive detail, noting that while many appeared delusional, they included knowledge of historical events and scientific concepts that seemed beyond the scope of an ordinary individual's education. Particularly notable were the patient's detailed descriptions of medical practices from the late 19th century, including obscure techniques that had been documented only in specialized journals of the period. Most disturbing were the patient's accounts of their own research, which aligned precisely with the experiments described in Percival Caldwell's journals that had never been published and remained sealed in the Westmoreland Historical Society's archives. When Dr. Whitlock inquired how the patient had come to know of these experiments, they reportedly smiled and replied, "One tends to remember one's own work." Before their death in early 1969, the patient reportedly experienced a moment of perfect clarity, during which they dictated a letter to be sent to the Westmoreland Historical Society. The letter, preserved now in their archives, reads in part, "What I discovered was that extended existence is possible, but at a price too terrible to justify, the attic holds the proof of these wrongdoings. The chamber holds the means of this continuance. The truth was discovered, and an attempt was made to end the process. I could not allow it. But now I am tired. The process fails. Let this be the end of Percival Caldwell, in all forms. The letter continues with a detailed confession of how Percival had first discovered the preservation process through his study of ancient Egyptian embalming techniques, modified with principles drawn from Eastern medical practices and certain alchemical traditions. He described how he had initially extended his life through a series of treatments requiring rare mineral compounds, but had eventually developed a more efficient method involving the transfer of vital essence from one living being to another. This transfer, he explained, was not merely physical, but incorporated aspects of consciousness as well, resulting in a gradual merging of identities. The process was initially temporary, requiring regular renewals, but with each iteration, the effect became more permanent until eventually the host's original identity was almost entirely supplanted by Percival's own. According to the letter, Percival had first implemented this technique with his own son, Matthias's father, maintaining the pretense of a normal father-son relationship while gradually assuming control of the younger man's consciousness. When that body began to fail due to the strain of supporting two identities, he shifted to his grandson, Matthias, initiating the process slowly to avoid detection. The plan might have succeeded had Matthias not discovered the hidden chamber and the documentation of previous transfers. This discovery allowed him to recognize what was happening to him and to resist the complete subsumption of his identity. The result was a fragmented consciousness, neither fully Matthias nor fully Percival, but a contested space in which both existed simultaneously. The sanatorium's records indicate that upon death the patient's body deteriorated at an accelerated rate, as though decades of delayed processes were occurring simultaneously. By the time authorities from Westmoreland County arrived to investigate, there was very little left to examine. Testing, which might have confirmed or refuted the patient's extraordinary claims, was not yet available in 1969. The Caldwell Mansion stands empty today, its restoration never completed due to what the Historical Society describes as structural issues and funding limitations. Local residents avoid the property, particularly after sunset, and there are persistent rumors of light seen in the east wing attic windows on certain nights of the year, particularly around the anniversary of the October incident. Perhaps most unsettling are the unusual occurrences that have been reported in Ravenswood and surrounding communities since 1918. Approximately 1 every 20 years, always involving individuals with documented connections to the Caldwell estate through various associations. The most recent was in 1968, coinciding precisely with the admission of the mysterious elderly patient to the Blue Ridge Sanatorium. No further unusual occurrences have been reported since the patient's death and subsequent deterioration. Whether this represents the true end of Percival Caldwell's unnatural existence or merely a pause in a cycle that has continued for generations remains a matter of speculation. What is certain is that the attic of the Caldwell Mansion has remained sealed since the Historical Society's initial exploration in 1963, its contents deemed historically sensitive and access restricted to authorized personnel only. Dr. Josephine Mercer, descendant of the physician who attended Adelaide Caldwell, summarized the case in her 1965 monograph on historical medical anomalies. The Caldwell affair represents a unique intersection of scientific ambition and moral transgression. If even a fraction of the documented evidence is to be believed, Percival Caldwell discovered something profound about the nature of human mortality, and in doing so, became something less than human himself. As for the specific contents of the attic chamber, inventory records from the 1963 exploration list instruments of unconventional design, preserved materials of uncertain origin, and most notably a series of portraits showing individuals at different periods, all bearing a striking resemblance despite the temporal differences that should have existed between them. Among the more disturbing artifacts recovered from the hidden chamber were several leather-bound volumes containing what appeared to be case studies, each detailing a different subject and the various procedures performed. These subjects are identified only by initials, but cross-referencing with records suggests they were associates of the Caldwell estate who had visited the mansion over the years and subsequently disappeared. The procedures described in these case studies involve gradual extraction of what Percival termed vital essence through a series of interventions, followed by a transfusion process that apparently allowed him to incorporate this essence into his own physical form. Most disturbing are the notes on each subject's gradual deterioration and Percival's clinical observations of their condition, which he recorded without a trace of empathy or moral concern. One volume, dated 1883, contains a detailed account of what appears to be Percival's first successful complete preservation, the full extension of his own vitality through a combination of physical and psychological techniques. The subject in this case is identified as H.C. Iris, believed to be Harlan Caldwell, Percival's own associate, who officially died of consumption that same year, but whose actual fate may have been far more disturbing. According to the journal, the process involved not merely the transfer of vital essence, but a gradual absorption of life force, with Percival's vitality strengthening while the subjects diminished. The final entry in this particular volume reads, "The preservation is complete. The subject's strength has been fully transferred. I now exist with decades of potential ahead. The household accepts the narrative without question, a testament to the procedure's success. The discomfort of the process fades with each passing day. Soon, I believe, it will feel as though this strength has always been mine." This account aligns disturbingly well with contemporary reports of Harlan Caldwell's decline from his illness and Percival's subsequent vigor, which family correspondence from the period attributes to the beneficial effects of his medical studies. What these letters describe, increased vitality, changed mannerisms, and a sudden intensification of medical research, can now be interpreted as evidence of Percival's successful implementation of his theories. The implications of this discovery extend beyond the fate of a single family. If Percival Caldwell did indeed develop a method of extending his existence at the expense of others, and if this technique was documented in journals that may have been shared with his medical correspondents, the possibility exists that similar procedures might have been attempted, perhaps successfully, by others in his circle. Several of Percival's European colleagues are known to have founded private medical institutes in Switzerland, Austria, and northern Italy, facilities that operated with minimal oversight and catered exclusively to wealthy clients seeking treatments unavailable through conventional channels. Records from these institutes are fragmentary at best, but what documentation does exist suggests a focus on rejuvenation therapies and life extension protocols similar to those described in Percival's journals. Of particular interest is the Helvetian Institute for Longevity Research, established in 1885 by Dr. Wilhelm Schreiber, one of Percival's most frequent correspondents. The institute operated for nearly 40 years in a remote alpine location, treating an exclusive clientele that included aristocrats, industrialists, and other individuals of substantial means. Its closure in 1923 followed a series of unexplained events in neighboring villages, events that bear a striking resemblance to those associated with the Caldwell Mansion. The connection between these occurrences and the Institute's practices was never officially established, but local folklore from the region includes tales of the old ones who wear young faces and warnings about strangers who speak with the voices of those long absent. These stories, once dismissed as superstitious nonsense, take on a more sinister aspect when viewed in light of the Caldwell case. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of the entire affair is the possibility that Percival Caldwell's techniques for preservation and transference may have been refined and expanded upon by subsequent practitioners. The journals found in the Caldwell Mansion's hidden chamber represent early experiments in what their author termed existence perpetuation. But what advances might have been made in the decades since? Modern medical science acknowledges the possibility of significant life extension, tissue regeneration, and even theoretical consciousness preservation as potential extensions of current technology. If Percival Caldwell somehow stumbled upon primitive versions of these techniques more than a century ago, what might be possible now for those with access to his research and the resources to implement it? This question haunted Dr. Josephine Mercer until her death in 1971, a death that some have suggested came too suddenly and too conveniently for someone who had been investigating the Caldwell case with increasing intensity. Her final research notes, discovered among her effects but never published, pose a disturbing hypothesis. What if Percival Caldwell was not unique in his discovery? What if others found similar paths to extended existence? How would we identify them among us? And most critically, how many others have they influenced over the decades? These questions remain unanswered, but certain facts are difficult to ignore. Several prominent individuals connected to the investigation of the Caldwell case, including Sheriff Hargrove, Dr. Augustine Mercer, and at least 2 members of the Historical Society's 1963 exploration team, experienced dramatic personality changes following their involvement, often coupled with sudden shifts in their professional interests and personal relationships. In each case, these changes were attributed to the psychological impact of what they had witnessed or discovered. But in light of Percival Caldwell's documented techniques for preservation, a more disturbing interpretation presents itself: that contact with the artifacts in the attic chamber might have facilitated a form of influence, allowing whatever remained of Percival, or others like him, to continue affecting the world around them. This theory gained traction in academic circles during the mid-1980s, following the publication of Dr. Sebastian Thorne's controversial paper, Environmental Consciousness, the Caldwell Paradigm, and its Implications for Extended Existence. Thorne suggested that consciousness might be preserved not only through the elaborate procedures documented in Percival's journals, but also through prolonged exposure to certain objects or environments associated with the original consciousness. According to this hypothesis, the attic chamber in the Caldwell Mansion might function as a kind of repository, imprinting aspects of Percival's influence onto those who enter it. This would explain why access to the space has been so strictly controlled since the 1963 exploration, not because of structural concerns or toxic materials, but because of the potential for what Thorne termed identity influence. Maycomb, while Thorne's paper was largely dismissed as speculative fiction by his contemporaries, his subsequent behavior lent an unsettling credibility to his theories. Following a self-financed visit to Ravenswood in 1987, during which he allegedly bribed a caretaker for brief access to the East Wing, Thorne abandoned his academic position, liquidated his assets, and disappeared from public view entirely. He resurfaced 3 years later as the founder of the Prometheus Institute, a private research facility dedicated to transcending the limitations of human mortality. The Institute's published work focused ostensibly on conventional life extension technologies, but former employees have described more esoteric research conducted in its restricted laboratories, research involving consciousness preservation and identity extension protocols reminiscent of Percival Caldwell's own experiments. The Prometheus Institute operated for just under a decade before being shut down following a federal investigation into unethical research practices. By the time authorities gained access to its facilities, Thorne had vanished once again, leaving behind laboratories filled with equipment of unusual design and research notes written in a curious mixture of modern scientific terminology and phraseology reminiscent of Percival Caldwell's 19th century journals. Most disturbing were the records discovered in a hidden vault beneath the Institute's main building, records detailing experimental procedures performed on subjects identified only by numbers, many of whom appeared to have undergone interventions similar to those described in Percival's case studies. The whereabouts of these subjects remains unknown, as do the full extent and results of the experiments performed upon them. The federal investigation into the Prometheus Institute was abruptly terminated in 2001, all records sealed by executive order, and the facility itself demolished and the site reclaimed by the surrounding forest. No official explanation was ever provided for this sudden cessation of inquiry, but rumors persist in certain circles that what investigators discovered in the Institute's deepest vaults was too disturbing or too valuable to be made public. Is it possible that Percival Caldwell's techniques for preservation and transference have continued to evolve in secret, perpetuated by individuals who share his obsession with transcending death's limitations? Are there others like him, moving through time by assuming new identities? And if so, how might one recognize them, these ageless consciousnesses inhabiting successive physical forms? The answers to these questions remain elusive, but certain patterns have emerged from the scattered evidence available to researchers brave or foolish enough to pursue them. Individuals suspected of employing Caldwell-type techniques typically exhibit several common characteristics. Unusual familiarity with historical periods they could not have experienced directly. Abrupt and dramatic shifts in personality, often following periods of illness or isolation. Accelerated learning in fields previously unfamiliar to them, and a distinctive pattern of interpersonal relationships characterized by intense initial connection, followed by gradual withdrawal and eventual severance. Most notably, these individuals tend to maintain carefully curated collections of personal items from earlier periods, not displayed as a collector might show them, but kept private, often hidden, and handled with a frequency and intimacy that suggests something beyond mere appreciation. These collections typically include items of no apparent monetary value, but significant personal association, writing implements, items of clothing, medical instruments, or books with extensive marginalia. The Westmoreland Historical Society maintains an unofficial registry of individuals exhibiting these characteristics, particularly those with connections to the medical profession or to families with histories of unusual longevity. This registry is not publicly acknowledged, and access to it is severely restricted. But its existence speaks to the continuing influence of the Caldwell case on those who have studied it most closely. The Society's current director, Dr. Mary Ann Reynolds, no relation to the Lucinda Reynolds, who served as Adelaide Caldwell's maid, has neither confirmed nor denied the registry's existence, but has spoken publicly about the need for vigilance in monitoring potential continuations of Percival Caldwell's legacy. Her recent publication, Extended Existence: The Ethical Implications of the Caldwell Case, stops short of claiming that such extensions continue to occur, but presents compelling evidence that the necessary knowledge and techniques remain available to those willing to seek them out. The attic of the Caldwell Mansion, Reynolds writes, represents only the most visible instance of a phenomenon that may be far more widespread than we care to acknowledge. How many other hidden chambers exist in how many other seemingly respectable homes? How many other estates harbor secrets similar to those of the Caldwells? And how would we recognize them if they moved among us? These questions take on additional urgency in light of recent developments in the field of longevity research. Modern science has begun to explore the possibility of significant life extension, tissue regeneration, and even theoretical consciousness preservation as potential extensions of current technology. If Percival Caldwell somehow stumbled upon primitive versions of these techniques more than a century ago, what might be possible now for those with access to his research and the resources to implement it? The philosophical dimensions of the Caldwell case extend even further, challenging fundamental assumptions about the nature of self and the boundaries of individual existence. Is the self contained within the physical brain, or is it something more abstract that can be preserved and relocated? And if the latter, what happens to concepts of moral responsibility, interpersonal relationships, and the very notion of human uniqueness? These questions have sparked renewed interest in the Caldwell Mansion itself, which some researchers now view as more than merely the site of Percival's experiments. Dr. Sebastian Thorne, before his disappearance and subsequent controversial reemergence, suggested that the mansion, particularly the East Wing attic, might function as a kind of consciousness repository, where traces of Percival's identity remain present in some form. This theory, initially dismissed as pseudoscientific speculation, has gained credibility following multiple reports of unusual psychological effects experienced by those who have spent time in or near the mansion. These effects include vivid dreams featuring individuals and events from the Caldwell family history, intrusive thoughts in antiquated linguistic styles, and in some cases, temporary personality changes described by witnesses as though someone else is looking out through their eyes. Most of these effects dissipate after the affected individuals leave the Ravenswood area, but several cases of persistent personality alteration have been documented, alterations that align disturbingly well with what is known of Percival Caldwell's temperament, interests, and speech patterns. Whether these changes represent actual influence or merely a form of psychological suggestion remains a matter of debate, but their consistent nature across multiple, unrelated individuals suggests something beyond coincidence or imagination. The lock on the attic door remains secure. But as Adelaide Caldwell noted in her final writings, locks keep things out. What happens when the thing to be feared is already inside a history, inside a mansion, inside ourselves? Some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again. Some discoveries, once made, transform not just the discoverer, but all who come after. In the years since the events of 1918, numerous researchers, historians, and investigators have attempted to access the Caldwell Mansion's East Wing attic. All have been denied. The Historical Society maintains its stance that the area remains unsafe for exploration, though internal documents leaked in 1985 suggest the true concern is not structural integrity, but the possibility that something in that space remains active, something that should not be disturbed. The final word on the Caldwell case may belong to Dr. Josephine Mercer, who concluded her monograph with a warning that resonates beyond the specific circumstances of the mansion and its inhabitants. The pursuit of extended life is as old as humanity itself. What the Caldwell case teaches us is that success in this endeavor may come at a cost too terrible to bear, not just for the individual who achieves it, but for all connected to them. Some knowledge is best left undiscovered, some doors best left unopened, some attics best left unexplored. As night falls completely over Ravenswood, the Caldwell Mansion stands in silhouette against the darkened sky, its attic windows like empty eyes staring out across the decades, bearing witness to a secret that was discovered once and might someday be discovered again. For while the mansion itself may eventually crumble to dust, the knowledge it contains and the possibility it represents will endure as long as human beings continue to fear death and seek ways to transcend their mortality regardless of the cost to others. The macabre secret discovered in that attic in 1918 was not just about what Percival Caldwell had done, but about what humans are capable of doing when desire overcomes morality, when the will to continue one's own existence supersedes all other considerations. It is a lesson written in dust and decay, in faded ink on yellowed pages, in the architectural spaces we designate as repositories for the things we wish to forget but cannot bring ourselves to destroy. And so the attic waits, as it has waited for over a century, for the next person who will discover its secrets and face the terrible choice that confronted Matthias Caldwell: to perpetuate a monstrous legacy or to end it, knowing that ending it means confronting one's own mortality. For in the Caldwell Mansion, as perhaps in all of us, the past is never truly past. It lives on in our history, in our architecture, in the secrets we keep from others and from ourselves. The macabre secret in the attic of the Caldwell Mansion was never just about what was found there in 1918. It was about what has always been there, in the darkest corners of human ambition: the willingness to sacrifice others for one's own continuance, the refusal to accept the natural limitations of existence, the terrible price of immortality. And that secret, unlike Percival Caldwell himself, truly is immortal.